Hi, in this video we'll be looking at the difference between DML and DDL in the SQL, right? So firstly we're gonna look at the SQL. So what is the SQL? The SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's the database language, relational database language. So it's used when you create a database for the relational databases, and also when you need to manipulate the data. So below are the different database management systems that are using the SQL. The first one is Microsoft SQL Server. It's a relational database, and the second one is MySQL, is also a relational database, and the third one is Oracle database, is also the relational database, right? So when we talk about the relational databases, we refer to the databases that are built based on the tables, and they also have the relationships like one-to-one, many-to-many, one-to-many, those kind of relationships. Okay, and then here we'll look at the DML and the DDL. So we're gonna start with the DDL, which is stand for data definition language, right? So below are the queries that are used in the DDL queries that are used in the relational databases. So when we refer to the DDL queries, we refer to the queries that you run when you need to deal with the database directly. Whether you want to add the table, you want to drop the table, maybe you want to add the column, or maybe you want to change the size of the column, something like that, or maybe you need to create the views, create tables, those things. So those are the data definition language. They have nothing to do with the data. They don't touch the data. So it's like when you build the foundation. Like when you build the house before you put the furniture inside. So before you can put the furniture inside, you need to build the house. So these are the tools that you one of the queries that you'll run when you deal with your database directly before you even add the data to the database. So the first one is create. So with create you can create a table, create views as mentioned before, and then with a drop we can also drop a database. For instance, if you want to remove database, you can drop a database. Alright, or maybe you want to delete a table, you can run drop and then to also drop a table. And then with an alter is when you want to make the changes to the database directly, not to the data. Let's say you want to change the size of the certain field or column, I can say, on a table, you can use the alter. Or maybe you want to add the column. Let's say you created a table that you realize, no, I'm missing this type of column, I need to add it. You can use alter. Right. So moving back to the data manipulation language, which is DML. This one is used when you want to deal with the data directly, right? Remember on the DDL I gave you an example with a house, like when building a house. So with the DML, I can just give you an example like with the furniture inside of that house that you built. So the DDL, you build the database there, and the DML, you deal with the data in that database. So on the DDL, I give you an example, let's say with the building a house, right? That was an example of DDL. You build a house, just the same as when you create a database. You decide how your house is supposed to be structured, right? You decide where the room 1 will be, the room 2 will be, same as when you create a database, you decide how the table 1 will be look like, how the table 2 will be look like, how will the table 1 link to table 2, the same way you plan the house. You'll say when the person going out from this room 1 will pass here in the passage, and then will pass here in the dining, those kind of steps. So when you move to the DML, which is a data manipulation language, these are used when you deal with the data. So in a house example, it will be when you deal with your furniture. Now you've done building your house, you need to put the furniture inside. Alright, you need to when the times goes by, you might need to change some of the furniture, so maybe you might need to remove them permanently from your house, right? So looking at the database from the database perspective, the data manipulation language includes the insert, right? I'll just start with this one. The insert is when you want to add the data to the database. So looking at the building, an example would be when you want to add your furniture to your house, right? In a database perspective, you run the insert query, add the data to the database that you created, right, using the DDL queries. And now you inserted the data, right? And then you need to see maybe the data that you have inserted. You can run the select query. So these queries only deal with the data. They don't alter the database in any way. They only deal with the data itself. So you run the select query, right, to get your data that you have inserted to your database, right? So looking at the building example, obviously when you have the furniture there, every day you do see the furniture that you have inside of that house. You do observe, you can see, okay, this furniture is old, this one is still new, this one maybe I can move it to there, things like that. So looking at the database perspective, you run the select query, you get your data, right? And then now you want to maybe to remove the data. Let's say you have the data that you no longer need in your database, or maybe you inserted by a mistake and then you don't need that database. You run the delete query, right? You run the delete query. So going back to the house an example, remember we talked about building the house, right? We build the house just like when you run the DDL queries, and then you have added the furniture inside the house. That's like when we insert the data in the database using the insert query in a DML, data manipulation language. And now maybe the furniture is old, you want to remove, you remove one of the furnitures there, right? You remove one of the furnitures there because it's old, or maybe you bought the wrong one, then you decide, no, I don't need this, I'm returning it back. So looking at the database perspective, the delete query, you can remove the data that you're no longer interested in, or maybe you inserted by mistake, right? For instance, I can give an example as this. When you create the account on a certain website, or maybe certain mobile app, or maybe a desktop application, your data is added to the database, and when you delete your account, it means you're removing your data from that database of that system. During the deletion, if that system is using the relational database, the delete query will be used to remove your data. So now, moving on, we're still on the data manipulation language. So now you can run the update query to change the old data to the new data, right? Going back to the building an example, it will be like you have the house, you have the furniture inside, there's an old furniture, you want to replace it, you take it out, you buy the new one, right? So with looking at the database perspective in a data manipulation language, it will be an update. You will choose the row that you need to update, because If you don't choose the certain row, it means you'll update everything on that table, right? So but we'll look more into that when we do it practically. So now we're just looking at these different queries in a theoretically only, right? So these are not the only queries that we have under data manipulation, and these are not the only queries that we have under DDL, but these are the mainly used queries in a relational databases, right? So this will be the last one that we explained today. So if you are interested and you would like to know more about these different queries, the queries for data manipulation and the queries for data definition, please subscribe to this channel. I'll be uploading more videos related to the relational databases.